Ladies and gentlemen, prayer is often misunderstood. Too many see it as a passive act, a soft murmur sent into the silence, a gesture of surrender with no real weight. They assume it's a ritual performed in desperation, a whisper spoken when all else fails. But real prayer, true, transformative prayer is not a fallback plan. It is not a resignation. It is a force, a conscious and deliberate engagement with the very core of who we are. When it is approached with sincerity and depth, it becomes something far greater than words. It becomes a movement within the soul, a recalibration of the heart, and a spark that lights the path forward when everything else feels lost. Prayer is active, it requires presence, it demands intention. It's not merely speaking, it's listening, not merely asking, it's aligning. When done with awareness, prayer forces us to confront the raw reality of our inner world. It asks us to pause, to lay down ego, and to show up not as who we pretend to be, but as we truly are. That act alone is transformative. In a world that rewards speed, noise, and distraction, to stop and be still with your own thoughts is nothing short of radical. The act of sincere prayer is an exercise in humility. It teaches us that we are not the center of the universe. It teaches us that control is an illusion, and that some answers come not by forcing, but by releasing. But make no mistake, releasing is not giving up. It is making space for clarity, for healing, for connection. It is preparing the ground where change can actually take root. Think of a seed. Before it grows, it must be buried. Before it rises, it must surrender to the soil. Prayer is like that. On the surface, it may seem small. Just a whisper, a closed eye, a quiet moment. But beneath it, something profound is happening. It's the beginning of a shift, a realignment, a healing. Not of the world outside, but of the one inside. And once the inner world begins to shift, the outer world cannot stay the same. The power of prayer lies not in magical thinking, but in what it awakens within us. It reminds us of what we value. It slows us down long enough to recognize what we're ignoring. It realigns our actions with our principles. It asks, who am I becoming? What am I carrying that no longer serves me? What am I running from? What pain have I buried that now needs light? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones, and prayer, sincere, grounded prayer is one of the few places left where people feel safe enough to ask them. The depth of prayer has little to do with the words and everything to do with the presence behind them. Whether it is whispered alone before dawn or spoken aloud among others, the energy it carries is shaped by honesty. You don't have to be eloquent, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be real. That's the power of it. That's what makes it transformative, because in a world where everyone is performing, prayer invites you to be authentic. And when you bring your real self into the space of prayer, your confusion, your hope, your pain, your gratitude, something begins to shift, the weight begins to lift, not always instantly, not always dramatically, but slowly, surely, a change begins. You may find clarity where there was chaos. You may feel strength where there was exhaustion. You may begin to forgive, to release, to believe again. Even neurologically, science now recognizes the impact of focused, meditative prayer on the human brain. It calms the nervous system. It increases compassion. It reduces stress. These are not accidents. They are signs. Signs that something ancient still works. That in the stillness of genuine spiritual practice, we come back to ourselves, and through that, back to others. Prayer also creates connection, not just vertically to the divine, to the transcendent, but horizontally to each other. When we pray for someone, we are no longer indifferent to their pain. When we hold them in our thoughts, we acknowledge their humanity. That changes the way we move through the world. It softens the hard places in us. It rewires how we respond to injustice. Prayer doesn't just make us more spiritual. It makes us more human, and in times of personal or collective brokenness, in moments when satven, the symbolic space of pain and fragmentation, stands before us, prayer becomes an act of repair. It is a thread that begins to stitch together what has been torn, not always visibly, not always dramatically, but deeply, truly, enduringly. So no, prayer is not passive. It is not a last resort. It is not weakness. When it is honest and deep, it is a force for healing, for change, for grounding, and for restoration. The world may overlook it, mock it, or forget it, but those who have touched its power know. When you pray with your whole being, the world inside you begins to mend. And when that world mends, you become capable of mending the world around you. There is a mistaken belief, often unspoken but widely accepted, that prayer is a form of retreat, that it is the last refuge of the helpless, a kind of spiritual hiding place for those who can't face reality or who have given up on action. But the truth is quite the opposite. Real prayer, true, grounded, soul-stirring prayer is not an escape from the world. It is an entrance into it, not to run from what is broken, but to begin the long, hard work of repair. And that work begins in the most sacred and overlooked place of all, within ourselves. We live in a time where action is praised and contemplation is often dismissed. We are urged to hustle, to fix, to prove. But without inward repair, outward action loses its wisdom. It becomes reactive rather than responsive, performative rather than purposeful. That is why true prayer matters, because it centers us before we move. It aligns us before we act. It invites us to look inward first, to acknowledge the fractures, the fear, the pride, the pain, and begin the process of healing what lies beneath the surface. The prayer that repairs doesn't pretend the world isn't on fire. It doesn't shut its eyes to injustice or block its ears to suffering. Instead, it says, let me start by calming the chaos inside me so I can face the chaos outside with courage and clarity. It is the opposite of avoidance. It is the beginning of restoration. We are so often tempted to focus outward. It is easier to criticize others than it is to confront ourselves. It is simpler to point out what's wrong out there than to admit what's unhealed in here. But the prayer that repairs begins where all change must begin inside. It begins with asking, where am I angry? Where am I bitter? Where have I closed my heart? Where have I stopped listening? It challenges us not to become perfect, but to become real. Because only real people can create real healing. And the truth is, we cannot give what we do not have. A fractured soul cannot offer peace. A restless heart cannot bring calm. A divided mind cannot speak unity. So we go inward not to hide, but to clean the mirror, to reset the compass, to prepare the soil. The work of true prayer is invisible at first, but its effects ripple outward with quiet power. When you repair your inner world, your words carry more weight. Your actions resonate with deeper purpose. You become an instrument of restoration, not just a witness to the wreckage. Prayer also teaches us how to see again. In the noise of everyday life, our vision becomes cloudy. We see others through the lens of judgment, fear, or fatigue. But when we pray sincerely, we begin to see differently, not just others, but ourselves. We stop measuring worth by achievements or value by appearances. We begin to see the divine in the ordinary, the sacred in the flawed, the possibility in what was once dismissed. That kind of vision is not soft. It is revolutionary. It changes how we lead, how we serve, how we fight for what is right. And make no mistake, the world needs repair. You don't have to look far to see what's broken. Relationships, systems, communities, hearts. But repair doesn't begin with rage. It begins with reflection. It begins with people who are brave enough to sit in silence, to ask hard questions, to face their own darkness, and to rise with a deeper commitment to light. Prayer is not passive because repair is not passive. It is a discipline. It is an act of will. It requires faith, yes, but it also requires effort, honesty, and responsibility. And when you've done that inner work, when you've poured yourself out in quiet confession or open gratitude, something changes. The way you speak changes, the way you treat strangers changes, the way you show up in your home, in your work, in your neighborhood changes. You begin to move through the world not as someone in search of power, but as someone who carries peace. Not as someone who seeks recognition, but as someone who brings presence. And presence, deep, grounded, aware presence, is one of the rarest and most healing forces there is. The prayer that repairs the world does so not by magic, but by motion. It stirs something inside you. It reminds you of who you were before fear took over. It restores the quiet strength to continue even when change seems slow. It turns wounds into wisdom, and that wisdom becomes your offering to a world that is desperate for healing, not just performance. So no, true prayer doesn't escape the world. It enters it more fully. It starts within, not because that's where the world ends, but because that's where it begins. If you want to repair what's broken out there, start by repairing what's broken in here. That's not weakness. That's the deepest kind of strength. Silence is uncomfortable for many people. In a world filled with constant noise, be it the buzz of technology, the hum of traffic, or the chatter of media, we've grown accustomed to distractions that keep us from encountering one of the most powerful, and at times unsettling, realities ourselves. It's in silence that the masks start to slip, the background noise fades, and the truth begins to echo back. This is why silence feels so heavy. It's not empty, it's full, and the fullness it contains is often what we've been avoiding. That's where prayer enters, not as an escape, but as a bridge between discomfort and courage, between avoidance and truth. When we step into silence with the intention of prayer, we don't always find immediate peace. What we often find first is resistance. The mind starts to wander. Old memories rise up. Doubts emerge. There's a reason we reach for our phones when we feel alone. Why we keep ourselves busy when the world grows quiet. Because silence has the power to confront us with everything unresolved inside. It's easier to be distracted than to be still, but stillness is where clarity lives. Stillness is where growth begins. Prayer does not remove the tension of silence. It transforms it. It gives that silence a purpose, a direction, a safe container in which we can bring what's hidden into the light. Prayer says you don't have to run from your pain. You don't have to bury your questions. You don't have to pretend to have it all figured out. Bring all of it here. Lay it down in this sacred space. That is the invitation. Most of the truth we try to avoid isn't about the world, it's about ourselves. It's the guilt we carry but haven't addressed, the fear of failure we hide under ambition, the grief we've never fully mourned. The envy, the insecurity, the longing to be seen and understood. These truths linger in the background of our lives, influencing our decisions, clouding our relationships, exhausting our spirits. We keep them locked away because we're afraid they'll consume us. But silence brings them to the surface, and prayer, when honest and vulnerable, gives us the strength to finally face them. You might ask, why face these truths at all? Why not just move on, push forward, keep going? Because what we refuse to face controls us. What we suppress eventually leaks out in how we speak, how we love, how we lead. Avoided pain doesn't disappear, it distorts. But acknowledged pain begins to heal. That's the paradox. The truths we avoid are not our enemies. They are wounds waiting to be mended, and prayer is the place where we stop hiding and start listening. This is why silence in prayer is so important. Not the kind of silence where we're merely quiet, but the kind where we are fully present, where we are willing to wait, willing to hear, willing to be seen by something greater than our fears. That kind of silence is sacred. And in that sacred silence we find strength, not because everything becomes easier, but because we're no longer running from what's hard. Prayer gives us language when words fail. It allows us to sit with discomfort without judgment. It offers companionship in solitude. Even when we don't receive answers, we receive grounding. Even when the path isn't clear, we receive the courage to keep walking. That is the quiet miracle of prayer. It doesn't always change the situation, but it changes us, and that change, however small, is the beginning of something bigger. There is something profoundly human about facing the truth in prayer. You come not as a performer, but as a person. Not as a leader, a follower, a role, or a label, but as a soul, and in that space you are not asked to be strong. You are asked to be honest. That honesty opens a door. It disarms the fear. It allows light into places you've kept in shadow for too long. You realize that facing the truth doesn't destroy you. It liberates you. And once you've done that, once you've looked truth in the eye and remained standing, you carry that strength into the world. You stop needing to prove so much. You stop hiding behind noise. You become more present, more real, more available to others and to yourself. That is what makes prayer powerful. Not that it fixes everything outside of you, but that it repairs what's within so that you can engage with the outside world in a healthier, more whole way. So the next time you find yourself alone in silence, and the truths begin to rise, don't run. Don't fill the space with noise. Don't numb the moment with distraction. Instead, let prayer become your response, not as a performance, but as a posture of honesty, a practice of presence. A path toward healing, because in the silence we fear, the truth we need is waiting, and prayer gives us the strength to meet it. Repair does not begin in systems. It does not begin in grand speeches or sweeping changes. True repair begins in the most intimate, quiet space imaginable, the human soul. Before we mend the world, we must first mend what's broken within. That is the difficult truth many ignore because it asks something uncomfortable of us. It asks for personal accountability. It asks for honesty. It asks for time, reflection, and the courage to face things we'd rather avoid. And in that beginning place of repair, where words often fail and pride resists, prayer becomes the first spark. The first light, the quiet revolution that prepares the soil of the soul for something better to grow. When we think of revolutions, we think of crowds and banners, movements and uprisings, but the most enduring revolutions don't begin with noise, they begin with conviction. A change of heart, a shift in awareness, a new depth of compassion, that is where transformation is born, and that is what true prayer can ignite. In the stillness of prayer, something profound happens. The soul becomes aware of its need. Not its weakness, but its sacred potential. Not just what is missing, but what could be made whole again. We often search outside of ourselves for change. We point to broken politics, to strained relationships, to injustice, to pain. And all of these are real. But external healing cannot be sustained without internal transformation. That is why change that only focuses outward is often shallow or temporary. The greatest repairs come when people look inward first, find the fracture lines within, and start from there. That is the quiet revolution, the change no one sees, but everyone eventually feels. Prayer is not about fixing the world all at once. It's about lighting a single candle in the dark, a single spark that, over time, can spread warmth, light, and direction. A prayer that begins in silence, in humility, in truth. It doesn't stop there. It moves us. It reshapes how we interact with others, how we speak, how we listen, how we lead. When we begin to heal, we carry that healing into every room we enter. That's how prayer ripples outward, not by force, but by presence, by consistency, by alignment between who we are inside and what we do outside. Repairing the soul doesn't mean perfection. It means awareness. It means choosing to pause before reacting, to forgive when it's easier to resent, to love when it's easier to judge. These are small acts, but they are revolutionary acts in a world that rewards anger, ego, and division. Prayer grounds us in those choices. It strengthens the quiet parts of us that are often overruled by noise. It teaches us that tenderness is not weakness, and silence is not absence. Prayer turns the soul toward wholeness. And a whole soul cannot help but leave the world better than it found it. This kind of soul repair isn't glamorous. It doesn't win awards. It rarely gets noticed. But it is the foundation of everything else. Families are changed by it. Communities are shaped by it. Generations are impacted by it because a repaired soul becomes a vessel for peace, for purpose, for justice. It moves through the world with a different frequency. Not louder, but deeper, not faster, but truer, and others can feel that. Others are drawn to that, not because you preach it, but because you live it. The ripple effect of inner repair doesn't require power or position. It only requires integrity, and prayer helps you return to that integrity when the world tries to tear it away. Prayer asks nothing more of you than honesty. You don't need credentials to pray. You don't need perfect words. You just need the willingness to show up, to be still, and to listen. And in that posture, even for a few moments, you begin to see differently. You begin to move differently. You begin to live from a place of depth rather than performance. One of the reasons prayer is often underestimated is because its results are not always immediate. But like water wearing down stone, the work it does is gradual, quiet, and powerful. Day by day, prayer can reshape how we think, how we feel, how we heal. The world may not notice it at first, but over time they will feel it in how we respond to conflict, in how we extend kindness, in how we build, create, serve, and repair. So the next time you wonder how to begin repairing what feels broken around you, don't just look at the world. Look inward. Ask yourself what needs healing in your own heart. Start there. Light that candle. Say that prayer. Trust that the work you do in silence is no less important than the work done in public, because real revolutions are not always loud. Sometimes they begin in the soul, and when they do, they ripple outward, quietly, steadily, powerfully, changing everything they touch. Soul carries within it the power to heal others, not by preaching, but by presence, not by trying to fix everything, but by becoming someone who embodies peace, compassion, and wholeness. And the catalyst that makes that possible, time and time again, is prayer. Healing in its truest form does not come from denial, distraction, or delay. It comes from confrontation, courage, and spiritual surrender. It begins in the quietest corners of the heart, where the pain we've buried meets the grace we've forgotten. And in that intersection, between brokenness and divine attention, something begins to shift. That's what prayer initiates, not an instant escape from pain, but the beginning of a journey where pain is met with presence, and wounds are held with care. Prayer creates the sacred space we need to begin healing, not by changing our circumstances immediately, but by changing the way we carry them. It opens a channel between us and the divine, whatever form that takes for you. And in that channel we are reminded that we are not alone, that we are not too far gone, that what is shattered is not without hope. This is the soil where healing grows, not in isolation, but in intentional communion. When we are healed, truly healed, we become different people. We carry ourselves with softness instead of suspicion. We respond with patience instead of panic. We forgive more freely, love more deeply, and give more generously, not because we were forced to, but because we've experienced the power of healing firsthand. That transformation is not for us alone. It's for everyone we come into contact with. That is the ripple effect of a healed soul. It becomes a quiet, unwavering source of restoration for others. You may not even realize when your healing helps someone else. Maybe it's in how you speak to your children, or how you comfort a friend, or how you show up in a time of crisis with calm and clarity instead of chaos. These moments may seem small, but they're evidence of something sacred. Your healing has become contagious. You are no longer just surviving, you're guiding, you're no longer guarded, you're open, and in a world full of people walking around with silent wounds, your presence becomes a form of medicine. But let's not romanticize the process. Healing is not easy, it is not linear, it often gets messier before it gets better. There are days when the old pain resurfaces, when old patterns return, when old voices whisper that we haven't really changed. And it's in these moments that prayer sustains us, not just as a ritual, but as a refuge, as the quiet place we go not to be perfect, but to be honest, not to impress, but to be embraced. Prayer doesn't require us to come healed. It simply invites us to come. One of the most beautiful aspects of prayer is that it meets you where you are. You don't have to be strong to begin. You don't need eloquent words. You can come with tears, confusion, silence, even anger. What matters is not how polished your prayer is, but how present you are. That presence is what allows healing to begin. Because once you begin to show up to yourself honestly, you can start showing up to others honestly too. And this is where healing becomes generative. When your soul begins to heal, your relationships shift. You stop needing people to validate your worth. You stop projecting your pain onto others. You stop reacting out of fear. Instead, you begin to listen more deeply, love more fully, and forgive more freely. Not because you're trying to be virtuous, but because healing has changed your inner landscape. You have become a vessel, someone through whom peace and kindness can flow, simply because they now live within you. It's important to remember, being a vessel of healing doesn't mean being perfect. It means being whole enough to share what you've been given. It means understanding pain because you've walked through it. It means knowing how to sit with someone in silence because you've needed that silence too. That is the power of healing. It connects us. It softens us. It gives us empathy that no book or lesson can teach. And all of it can begin with one sincere prayer, one whispered word, one moment of surrender. So if you are in the middle of healing, keep going. Every step you take inward is a step the world needs. And if you've found some measure of peace, share it. Not with a megaphone, but with your life. Let your healed soul be a reminder to others that healing is possible, that prayer still works, That transformation, no matter how slow, is still sacred. Because in the end, every healed soul becomes a beacon, a vessel, a quiet revolution of love. There's a common misconception that change always needs to be loud, that it must be dramatic, public, and sweeping in order to be real. We see this in the world's focus on outward displays of power, speeches that stir crowds, protests that disrupt the status quo, social media movements that spread like wildfire. These are the moments that often get the most attention, the loudest applause, and the most media coverage. But what if I told you that the most profound and lasting changes in the world often begin in complete silence, that the most powerful shifts are the ones that no one sees in the moment, but everyone feels over time? This is the paradox of prayer. Prayer is a quiet act, an intimate practice that happens in the silence of our hearts, yet it has the potential to spark the loudest, most profound changes in the world. When we pray, we are not simply asking for things to be different in a faraway world. We are aligning ourselves with a deeper purpose, a higher vision. We are preparing ourselves to be instruments of transformation, even if that transformation doesn't unfold in dramatic or visible ways. In a world obsessed with speed and noise, prayer offers us a different kind of power, the power of patience, the power of presence, the power of subtlety. Prayer doesn't force change, it allows it to unfold naturally. It doesn't scream at the world to listen. It listens deeply to the world and then responds with wisdom, clarity, and calm. And this response, this quiet, patient action, creates a ripple effect that, over time, can be louder and more impactful than any outburst. Think about the way a single seed changes an entire forest. The seed is small, almost imperceptible, but from that humble start, a mighty tree can grow, reaching high into the sky, providing shade, shelter, and life for countless beings. Prayer is like that seed. In the silence of our hearts, we plant a seed of intention, of hope, of peace. We may not see its immediate impact, but with time, that prayer begins to take root in our lives. It transforms our hearts, it changes our behavior, it shifts our perspective. And as we change, the world around us begins to change, not because we demand it, but because we have been changed ourselves. There is something profoundly revolutionary about a person who is at peace within themselves. In a world where chaos reigns, the quiet strength of a peaceful soul stands in stark contrast. It doesn't need to fight for attention. It doesn't need to convince anyone of its worth. It simply is, and that peace, that quiet revolution, has the power to shift everything around it. This is the essence of prayer. It cultivates inner peace, inner clarity, and inner strength, which then ripples out into the world. It is the quiet act that begins the loudest changes in the world. Prayer doesn't just change us on an individual level. It changes our relationships, our communities, our societies. When we pray, we open ourselves to the possibility of seeing others not as obstacles to our success, but as fellow travelers on this journey of life. We begin to understand their pain, their struggles, and their humanity. We start to act from a place of compassion rather than judgment, and this, in turn, leads to better relationships, more collaborative efforts, and a collective shift toward kindness and cooperation. Moreover, prayer teaches us to listen. In a world that constantly talks at us, it's easy to forget the power of listening. Prayer invites us into a space where we are not only speaking, but also listening to our own hearts, to the world around us, and to something greater than ourselves. This listening, this stillness, is where wisdom resides. It's where creativity is born. It's where clarity emerges, and it's through this clarity that we can begin to make decisions that lead to true change. When we begin to make decisions based on what we've learned in the quiet space of prayer, we begin to act with intention, integrity, and foresight. And while those actions may not always be loud, they are impactful. The small, consistent decisions we make day in and day out, how we treat others, how we show up in the world, these are the actions that accumulate and create lasting change. And because these decisions are rooted in prayer, they are aligned with something greater than our own desires. They are aligned with truth, with justice, with compassion. They are aligned with the highest purpose. As we continue to grow in our practice of prayer, we begin to see that the changes we long to see in the world are not as far away as we once thought. They are within us. They are in the way we carry ourselves, the way we treat others, the way we show up in the world every single day. And when enough of us commit to this kind of quiet revolution, the world will indeed change. It may not be in the loud, dramatic way we expect, but it will be real, it will be lasting, and it will be profound. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by the noise of the world, or discouraged by the seeming lack of progress, remember this: prayer is the quiet act that begins the loudest changes in the world. You may not see it immediately. You may not hear it with your ears, but rest assured that prayer, in its quiet and patient unfolding, is shaping the world more powerfully than anything else ever could.